Hey guys, my name is Jared Willingham, and I'm an eighth grade Georgia Studies teacher teaching at Tryon Middle School, located in the northwest corner of Georgia. And as an eighth grade Georgia Studies teacher, I have a lot of units that I teach. I teach a economics unit, teach a government unit, teach a geography unit, and I teach history unit. And the history units are really the bulk of what we do in the classroom. And so knowing that, that is, I kind of want to think of myself much more as a history teacher. Um, Whenever I was crafting this project and deciding, what philosophy do I want to really base my whole curriculum around. And obviously, as you can see, empiricism is what I went with. But how did we get to that point? So, when you think of traditional history class, instruction has most often been based on the transmission of knowledge or facts. And while that's great because that is a lot of what history is knowing what happened, it has lended history class to being much more teacher led, where everybody knows the class that they were in, where they sat up, where the professor was in the front of the room and he lectured and students took notes, and you're really just a passive observer in the education process. I kind of want to try to get away from that because I feel like there's a real negative connotation towards history classes traditionally, because that is mostly what the approach to history education has been. Negatives of this approach, again, is I think it can create a lot more emphasis on memorization than just critical analysis skills, because students are passive learners. And so they tend to memorize the dates, the people, and what happened, and then be done with it. And you miss out on, crafting some critical analysis skills that students could acquire and really benefit them, not just as a history student, but in other areas of their life. I also feel like when you take this approach, you miss out on a lack of empathy and understanding to the past and lack of student collaboration. What I mean by lack of empathy, if we're learning about the civil rights movement and all we focus on is who were the people, what were the dates, and what happened, you miss out on creating a human connection with your students and the people that lived in that time. That could be something that's very difficult to create, but I think if you have students work together and you put the right approaches in place, you can do that. And I feel like that could really transform history classroom. So, when thinking about how we can create a human connection, I started to look at what philosophies kind of lend more to doing that, and that's where I landed on empiricism. Empiricism is the idea that knowledge is established through sensory experience and observation. And when you read that definition, that matches up perfectly with what I really want to try to do in transforming my philosophy as a history teacher to be much more, let's try to understand history from the perspective of the people that lived it and not just memorize the facts and the dates and the people. I also think it's important whenever you're crafting philosophy that's going to guide you in your classroom that you understand it's great to pull from more than one philosophy, because I do feel that when we talk about my approach as we look through this presentation, you're going to see aspects of constructivism, connectivism, and not just empiricism. So I think that's another important thing to take, and I thought that really helped me as I was creating this project to understand that it's great to take things from everywhere and to make the best possible classroom environment. But with that said, empiricism was the main philosophy I wanted to kind of roll with, and it's all about the fact that it puts a high importance on sensory experience and observation and evidence. Students will gain a deeper understanding of the content if they can somehow step back in time and try to experience the history through a first person perspective. Now, we can't put kids in a time machine and send them back to the Civil War so they have an understanding of why the South seceded. But what we can do is we can try to put instructional um, approaches in place that will lead that student to creating some sort of human connection and some sort of sensory experience to better understand the era in which we are studying. And so, again, empiricism was the philosophy I went with because I felt like that gave me the best opportunity to create that human connection. So now with empiricism as our philosophical foundation, I wanted to look at how can we implement some approaches, some instructional approaches to create that human connection, that sensory experience, and primary sources had to be included because primary sources come from the era of study. Whether it be a journal entry from someone who lived through the Battle of Chickamauga, whether it be images or videos from the civil rights movement. Those are sources that come straight from the era in which we are learning. And if you compare them with some really, really deep, some really good discussion based questions, I feel like as a teacher, you can really lead students to creating that sort of human connection and creating that sensory experience that you want to create to have students better understand the era and not just memorize the dates and the facts. And so, primary sources and discussion based questions are the main um, instructional approach I wanted to take to try to create that. Some complementary approaches that I think really round out this approach very well is writing historical narratives as an ideal assessment method. So, historical narratives are basically once you've learned the content and you feel like students are an expert on the era and what you were teaching them, you have them write a historical narrative, which is, you know, they are putting themselves in the shoes of someone who lived during that time period, whether it be writing a journal entry as a Spanish conquistador from their perspective. If a student can do that and do it effectively, then they know the content. And I feel like it's a very sound alternative method to traditional testing that matches up well with our philosophy of empiricism. Because if they can convey those emotions and those thoughts that you feel like a Spanish conquistador would have had when interacting with natives, then they know the content. And then field trips as an enrichment method, again, all about going out and seeing objects or seeing things from the era really help students create that connection to the time period they're studying. Current research, I love these two quotes I found from these two sources, and I think they match up really well with what I was trying to do. So first, it goes with primary sources being the main instructional approach. Primary sources in history classrooms teach students to think like historians and help them acquire valuable analytical skills. Again, that's everything I'm trying to do in this class is have kids think like historians and not just memorize facts. And then Dr. Popa has a great this great idea of historical consciousness and creating that with every student. Students that create a historical consciousness will find that they acquire three abilities: having sensitivity towards the past, understanding of the past, and representation of yourself in the past. Again, all about what I was trying to create with this approach is having students be able to step back in time and really experience the area in which they're studying without actually being there. And so these two quotes I kind of leaned on heavily when I was creating this project and thinking about how I'd do things in my classroom, because it's really everything I wanted to achieve. Now, practical application, how this would look in my classroom. So I took this from our New South Era standard. First, I feel like you have to teach students some analytical skills to be able to really look at primary sources and know what they're looking at. And it just really prepares the students to dissect documents like a historian, like we heard in the previous slide. Step two, once students have those skills, you provide them with some sort of time frame and some sort of understanding of the era we're going to study. So, for example, the New South era was from the late 1800s to early 1900s, and you just kind of give students a little framework so they understand what they're looking at when they're looking at primary sources before they do it. Next step is you provide students with a multitude of resources to analyze with a small group and to answer those discussion-based questions, whether it be political cartoons, transcripts, political speeches, or first-hand accounts from the era, whatever you can find that you think are good for students. Step four, you have groups present their findings. And as those groups present their findings, you have other groups take notes. And I feel like doing that helps fills in gaps in learning, because some other group might have pulled something different from a resource than another group did. So I feel like sharing is very beneficial. Socratic style debate will follow to encourage the discussion of differing viewpoints. This is all about trying to create multi-perspectivity and inclusion in the classroom, because again, we all experience things differently, and allowing students to share how they experience something or how they viewed a source and how it pertains to their life, I feel like is a great benefit to the classroom. And then we have our historical narratives and our field trips that kind of round everything out as an assessment method and enrichment method. But this is just a small snapshot of kind of what this approach would look like in my classroom. Now, future trends. This is where this gets very interesting, because, while this empirical approach as it is great, AI and virtual reality could very much make it even better. History classes could be the envy of every other content area if we could use these two technologies effectively in the classroom. AI, why would it be beneficial? Number one, fantastic research tool. Students don't have to spend hours trying to find resources. You put it in the AI, and AI can provide you with resources very quickly. There's already some apps out there like Hello History. Hello History is an app that you can chat with historical figures, and the responses are pretty accurate. And I feel like this is a really cool thing. It's like texting Abraham Lincoln. What student wouldn't think that's cool? Virtual reality is where this gets really, really cool. If you want to send students back in time to experience the civil rights movement, well, virtual reality can do that. It can literally create the sensory experience you're wanting to create in the classroom, and some real visual realism that other technologies just can't create, and other content areas wouldn't be able to utilize like history could. And so these two technologies and the possible benefits they could have in the history classroom are huge. And I think going into the future, history teachers really need to advocate for the use of these technologies in the classroom, because again, they could really make history class the envy of all other content areas, because we can literally create the sensory experience and the human connection we want to create. With that being said, guys, this was all about just trying to create a student-led environment in the classroom that leans on trying to create some sense of human connection to the content. I feel like if you can do that, if you can create a human connection to the content, then students are much more likely to understand and to really remember what it is that you're teaching them, and trying to just get away from the let's memorize these dates, these facts, these figures, which most history classes have always been, and let's much more understand the time period in which we're studying, and try to create some sense of a first person perspective, a human connection for our students. And again, if they can do that and they can truly connect to the content, then I feel like we could really change some students' perspectives and some students' lives, because you acquire all kinds of great skills when you can do that as well. So again, I appreciate your time listening, and hope everyone has a great day. Thank you very much.